What is up? Welcome to the DFS Academy, Club Fantasy's weekly DFS show. And, it is week 10 in the NFL. And there's something about when the NFL hits double digits that opens the eyes of fantasy managers. And it's time to look at your team and is it over? Do you have any chance of winning this season? If that is your situation, I give you one very big piece of advice. Keep setting lineups. Ruin somebody else's playoff run. Ruin their perfect record. Do stuff to keep this season interesting for you. But you could still win some money too in DFS. Let's build some lineups. What is up? Happy Friday. Welcome to the weekend. It is the DFS Academy. I am your host, Ryan Weisse, but you are not here to hear me babble. You want to get advice from Austin Amandolia. Austin, how are you doing today?
Hanging in there. Spent the first half of my week in New York, and I'm back home now and fighting off a cold. So we're hanging in there while we have an incredible Thursday night game going on.
Yeah, as a fellow New Yorker, I was happy to see you leave. I'm in Albany. We didn't get a chance to hang out. If I'd have known you were in the city, but you said it was a work week and you were working, I said I could have tried to take a train down. I could have hung out with you in person for the first time ever. But alas, we stick with digital. That's just the way it has to be sometimes. Austin, week 10, man, it's been a drag of a season. And to hear that we're just now technically crossing the halfway point, I'm like, my goodness, how are we going to do this again for the second half? And I don't necessarily mean this show. This show's fun, but my goodness, football is just doing a lot right now. This week we lose Dak Prescott probably for the rest of the season. And now they're saying Trevor Lawrence as well might be on the verge of not playing again for the season.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be some intriguing opportunities that open up on the DFS streets because of this. But for those redraft folks, sorry, it's tough out there. I think I actually also have Trevor Lawrence and like Scott Fishbowl or some nonsense like that. So I'm like,
I have Dak Prescott and Trevor Lawrence and Scott Fishbowl. I'm pretty sure. I'll have to verify, but I'm almost positive I do. And another league, I realized I have Dak Prescott in a super flex. I'm 4-5, still in the playoff push, but Dak Prescott and Matt Stafford are my only quarterbacks. So I'm kind of screwed right now. So I'm going to see who's selling at this point. But I love the DFS mindset. I'm sitting here, doom scrolling the injuries, and you're like, this makes some very interesting opportunities in DFS. And to Joe Zolo, my Wednesday co-host credit, that was the first thing out of his mouth about Cooper Rush this week. He said, Cooper Rush probably going to be the one of the cheapest quarterbacks this week, and he might be worth taking a look at. He also said the same thing about Bryce Young for that London game, and I thought that could be an interesting one as well. So we'll see how that goes. Guys, before we get into the Week 10 main slate, we like to take a look back at what we call answers to the test. Before we do that, let me remind you guys, like, subscribe, do all the things that, all the other really smart content creators tell you to do so that, Google will keep promoting us and we can get Google money. Secondly, if you want to play DFS with us, we don't just talk DFS. You will find links in the description of this video and in Austin's article that drops every Saturday morning to play with us on both FanDuel and DraftKings. We have leagues going on both of those. On FanDuel, we play the main slate. On DraftKings, we play every slate. We have a Thursday slate going on right now, which I built an abomination of a lineup that Austin specifically said not to build on this morning's episode of Oh Captain, My Captain. But that's just how I roll sometimes. So check the link in the description. You can play some DFS with us. Austin, answers to the test. Last week's Milli Maker lineup, guess what? They beat the season high score by almost 20 points, 262.1. Their lineup is an interesting one. It features some guys we talked about. It certainly features some guys we would have never thought to talk about. Geno Smith at quarterback. What's funny is I think we were a week off on that. We liked Geno the week before. Saquon Barkley, Austin, was literally your top play from your article. You said Saquon is the guy. Guess what? He was the guy. One of my favorite moments when I was putting the show sheet together, Devon Achane. I explained on the show my process of talking myself out of Achane, and you told me that was a mistake and you loved him as a play. Guess what? So did the guy who won $1 million last week. JSN went off. Cortland Sutton was in my lineup last week. Quentin Johnston was not in my lineup last week. Zay Flowers had a great week. Mike Gesicki was the number 1 tight end overall in the Tennessee defense. So, Austin, the running backs were obviously predictable. You spoke highly of both running backs in this Milli Maker lineup. Does anything else stand out to you about this? It's the highest score we've seen this season.
Yeah, it's the highest score we've seen this season. And according to Billy Ward at Fantasy Labs always does a recap of the Milli Maker. This lineup was 20 points. I had a 20-point gap over second place. So
yeah, I saw that. I actually noticed that too when I was researching for the show sheet, that I was like, oh, second place would have almost beat the weekly high score, but this one put 20 on top.
Yeah, which again is why the Milli Maker is very much a lottery ticket, right? It's because you could have an incredible week and somebody just decides, oh, I'm going to play Zay Flowers, and they go for 32.7 points when Denver has been one of the toughest secondaries in the league all year long. This person entered a lot of lineups, which allowed them to do some things like play Zay Flowers. I think, honestly, the biggest surprise to me in this was Quentin Johnston. But I do think, like, there's some degree of this where it's like, it's kind of predictable. Like Quentin Johnston, like he had this earlier in the season. He had a pop game and it was like, okay, interesting. And now he's doing it again. So it seems like he might end up becoming one of those guys that's very boom bust, and it's going to depend on the matchup. It's going to be a high upside play for tournaments. But overall, like there are some players in here I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Cortland Sutton, a ton of volume. I was interested and intrigued by Geno Smith last week against the Rams, and I wish I had gone more into it. I think it was a great way to attack him. Honestly, the DK Metcalf being in and out of the lineup is what scared me off of it. And then well, JSN just came through and made me silly for it.
Yeah, you hit on a point, Quentin Johnston. What's funny is in my head, the Browns defense is still pretty good, mainly because they've been decent for fantasy. But I noticed when building lineups last week that they were not very highly rated against wide receivers. I think I would have leaned more into Ladd McConkey in that situation. Josh found an interesting stat for our Wednesday show. I think it was Wednesday. Quentin Johnston's fantasy points this season, like 30% of all of his points or some number like that, have been off of broken coverage. And I think both of his touchdowns in this matchup were broken coverage. You can't predict broken coverage. Quentin Johnston may be the least predictable player in the NFL right now.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the traps that you could take away from this in terms of DFS is like, oh, I need to like figure out like every week I need to figure out what does that one do that's going to have a totally weird week. And it's like, you could do that, but you're just doing dart throws if you're just like picking randomly, right? There are ways.
It also works if you can build 150 lineups if you're that flush with cash.
So. Yeah, exactly. That definitely helps out.
All right, folks, that was enough tournament talk for this half of the show. We are going to get into the cash plays. This is Austin's specialty. Not only will we talk about it on this show, but Austin drops an article every single Saturday with his favorite cash plays. Some will match what you hear on this show. Others will not, because as I always tell you, we record this during the Thursday night game. Information that happens on Thursday does not always make it to Sunday. So Austin will have more information, and Austin preaches literally in the intro of his article almost every week. More information is better information, and that's what it really comes down to. Austin, we start with those high-priced players, 8,000 or above. We call it top of the class. Familiar face this week.
Yes, Bijan Robinson, and this isn't just because I like the Falcons. He is 7,700 on DraftKings, so not quite hitting the 8K range, but he is 8,800 over on FanDuel. The matchup's just really good. Like going up against the Saints. The Saints have been awful against the run in recent weeks, allowing the most points to the position since week 6. Atlanta is favored by 3.5 points. They have a 24.75 implied team total. Like, it's just the game environment, the matchup, the usage all lines up. This is very much easily a Bijan Robinson game. He's been coming alive kind of down the stretch. Last week, he had 26 touches. The week before, he had 20 touches. He has 2 consecutive weeks with at least 7 catches, which is bonkers. for a running back. So I feel really good about the usage. Atlanta's just running the ball really well right now in general. And so beating up against a bad Saints team, I feel like Bijan Robinson's going to roll. He'll be the highest rostered player, or one of the highest rostered running backs on the slate, barring some like injury opening up some cheap guy.
Yeah, this is one where it was easy, Austin, when I looked at my rankings for me to be like, I love Kirk Cousins again. But you 2 weeks ago, or probably even last week, talked about, or maybe both, that when it feels like a Kirk Cousins game, it could also easily just end up being a Bijan Robinson game. And we've seen that, as you've mentioned now, over the last 2 weeks. Not that Kirk has been bad. He just hasn't been a slate breaker because they get in these matchups where they can just run the football, and a Saints team that is literally falling apart in front of our very eyes seems like that's going to be a Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier game. We just have to hope that Algier doesn't, steal too much from us.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it cuts both ways. So in tournaments, I'm a little bit interested in going the Kirk Cousins route because I think it's a clear Bijan Robinson week to me, and that he's going to end up.
That gives you the contrarian.
Yeah, so it definitely cuts both ways, but I think Robinson, like, he has the upside. He could be really good in both cash and tournaments.
Nope, that makes a lot of sense. We move on to band nerds. These are the $6,000 to $8,000 plays. We call these the good students, but too much time practicing their instrument. Austin, you like a running back and a wide receiver out of this category?
Yeah, and I feel like we're going to start talking about this running back a lot until he gets a little bit more respect on, particularly on DraftKings. So
Kareem Hunt, I noticed that myself. They are just not pricing him up at all.
Yeah, which they tend to be the slower site to increase their salaries for players. Kareem Hunt is $6,600 on DraftKings. He's all the way up to 83 on FanDuel, so it is a little bit tougher over there, but I think it's still a good play. It's just volume. Like the matchup, I don't care what it is at this point. Kareem Hunt is getting 20 touches easily every game. He's getting red zone touches, opportunities to get into the end zone. Denver, Kansas City's playing Denver. They're 7.5-point favorites, so all the more reason to think that they're going to run the ball. Also, it's just the style of offense that Kansas City is playing. They want to hold the ball as long as possible, and so they are going to, if they need 3 yards, like this has been talked about a lot in NFL, like football guy space, talking about how Kansas City, if they need 3 yards, they'll get 4. If they need 7, they'll get 8. And I think that plays really well to Kareem Hunt, because if you need 4 yards, give it to the damn running back. And do it 20 times and just hold the ball all game, and the other team never gets a chance to win. So I really like Kareem Hunt this week. It's a really easy in terms of volume. I also am a big fan of Josh Downs. I think some people actually, I'm a little bit intrigued by Josh Downs' tournament. I'll just throw that out there because I think some people might be afraid of this given the way that the Colts looked.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up because, obviously Joe Flacco did not look like the answer in his first week as the starter.
He did not, but Josh Downs still brought in 9 targets. He had 6 catches for 60 yards, 12 points. It's not a mind-blowing performance at 6,200. We wanted him to push towards 18 points, really, but if he had scored a touchdown, that would have been it, right? Yeah. Like, it was that close. So I like going back to him for the volume, and the matchup is pretty good. They're going up against, the matchup's good in terms of game scripts, as they're going up against Buffalo. So they're going to be playing from behind. Like, if Buffalo is behind in this game, something has gone wildly wrong. Like, Josh Allen probably broke his leg walking out to the field. So they're going to be playing from behind. So Josh Downs is going to get a ton of volume.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Do you think, and does it matter for your Josh Downs play, do you think we see Anthony Richardson in this game or again this season for the Colts? They doubled down after the game that Flacco is the guy and is going to start, but do you think they'll have I don't want to call it the wherewithal because it's not like Richardson was great, but do you think they'll turn back to Anthony Richardson at some point?
Maybe at some point, but I doubt they do it this week. If you're going to bring him back, you're not going to do it against the Bills. You're going to do it against the Panthers.
That's a great point.
So maybe later on, maybe when they're officially eliminated from playoff contention, right? Like some of those kind of considerations, but I don't think it's going to happen this week. And so I'm rolling with Josh Downs. And honestly, as bad as Anthony Richardson was from an accuracy perspective, he was still targeting Josh Downs. Yeah. So yeah, those targets need to be higher quality, but the volume could still be there.
Yeah, Downs had a great game in Richardson's last start. It's just Richardson didn't have a great game, nor did the Colts. So, yeah, you hit the nail on the head with that one. Moving on, we call it Bookworms. We're talking $4,000 to $6,000 players. These are the easily underestimated guys. These are the ones who could end up winning you $1 million if you hit on these players correctly. You got a couple more wide receivers for us, Austin.
Yeah, it's kind of been the first time in a while too that I feel like we've had 2 Kansas City players as like cash considerations.
Yeah. Would you play
So
them both?
yeah, I would. I
Okay.
feel comfortable with them both because they're getting their volume in different ways. And honestly, this offense has gotten weirdly condensed. Like for the past 3 years, really since Tyreek Hill left, we've been used to like it's going to be a different dude every week. It's kind of not been the case this year. It's been 3 dudes.
Yeah.
It's been whoever the top running back is. It's been Travis Kelsey, and it's been whoever the top pass catcher is, and that's now DeAndre Hopkins, who is $5,300 on DraftKings and $6K on FanDuel. We're getting a discount here because they played on Monday night, so the prices were already put out there before that game. So DraftKings did not know that DeAndre Hopkins was going to go absolutely bonkers, score 2 touchdowns with 8 catches and 9 targets before they said, "Oh yeah, we'll throw him out there for $5,300." If he gets 9 targets again at $5,300, that is an incredible steal. I think he'll probably be highly rostered in his cash spots. I think also in this matchup it works out because they are playing Denver. Pat Surtain is usually a big consideration in this. I don't think he's going to cover D Hop. I think he's going to cover Travis Kelsey. That's kind of been the way that they've played against Kansas City for a while. So I think it's going to be more like they try and take Kelsey out of the game, which actually might open up things for D Hop. It's also possible Surtain just floats around and covers different guys. Like he may not shadow one guy in this game. And so I still think D Hop either way will get his volume. And then my second receiver in this category, I'm a little bit cheating because he's $3,900 on DraftKings, but he's $54 on FanDuel. It's Parker Washington.
Yeah.
Watch the injury reports for this one. I think it seems to be trending that Gabe Davis is going to be out this week.
Okay.
If that becomes official, I definitely will play Parker Washington in my cash lineups because he's super cheap. He didn't get like a lot of targets last week. Well, he got 6 targets. He got 3 catches though. So like at the salary, that's fine. He scored 7 points last week. And if he maintains that usage in a matchup where they're probably, again, going to be playing from behind, I feel comfortable with that. I also want to shout out the point that you made earlier about we have a couple of quarterbacks who might be rolled out. So first off, we have Dak Prescott's rolled out. So
and they're saying 4 to 6 weeks at minimum. After 4 to 6 weeks, he's not coming back, plain and simple. They have 2 or 3 wins right now. He's not playing again this season. That's just my thought. So.
Yeah. So I think there will be some intrigue there with Cooper Rush in cash contests. But honestly, Cooper Rush, I think it was at like 5,100. I checked a second ago. It's like in that range. He's in the 5K range.
Yeah.
Mac Jones is at 4,400. I'm intrigued by that for cash. He needs to get me 13 points. Minnesota's been obviously like they like to blitz the quarterback a lot. That cuts both ways. It means they can get cash sometimes.
Yeah.
But Jacksonville's going to be underdogs set by 7 points. So Mac Jones is going to have to throw the ball a ton. I'm interested in it too, because if you play Mac Jones with Parker Washington, you can fit Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, and Breece Hall in your lineup, which is very intriguing to me from a cash perspective.
Yeah, you've always kind of brought that up, how you can get really creative in DFS if you're willing to gamble on one guy here or there. And Parker Washington's a little bit that gamble. Mac Jones is certainly that gamble. And I guess the rest of the gambles, though, it's a tight end again, so I don't know how much of it's a gamble. It's C's get degrees. These are the pump plays. These are your sub 4K plays of the week. And as I mentioned, it's a tight end for us this week, Austin.
Yeah, it's a tight end, and it's honestly a toss-up between a tight end that I'm intrigued by and a tight end that I hate even talking about. But we're going to talk about Juwan Johnson first because he's $3,300 on DraftKings. It's just super cheap, and like Chris Olave, he's not going to be playing this week. Bud Means is out. If he was healthy, he's on IR. If he was healthy, I would want to play him, but obviously he's on IR. He's on IR. I have no idea.
Cedric Wilson has a questionable tag right now. Their leading target getter last week, I believe, is Mason Tipton, who I still have no idea who this man is. So.
Yeah, and I don't feel quite comfortable with Mason Tipton yet. I might get there by the time that we're in there. By the time Sunday rolls around, like he's probably in my pool of players I'm thinking about, but I'm more likely to try and find value at the tight end position, so then I can pay up at running back and whatnot. So I'm looking at Juwan Johnson. I am intrigued by Taysom Hill, which
Have to
I
be.
hate to admit, but I
Hey,
am.
by the way, we called that touchdown last week. We said he steals touchdowns in these types of games, and he did it last week. So.
Yes, and the last time actually, when they played earlier this year, that they played the Falcons earlier this year, Taysom Hill got in the end zone a couple of times, and it really annoyed me because I was betting on Alvin Kamara that week. Uh, but I would take either of the tight ends, kind of a salary consideration. If you need more salary savings, obviously go with Juwan Johnson, but I think Taysom Hill is actually fair game. So either of the New Orleans Saints tight ends are intriguing to me this week.
Yeah, Taysom Hill. You said you hate even talking about him. I certainly hate calling him a tight end. Though he did actually see some targets last week, so maybe we can start to feel a little bit better about calling him a tight end. But the long and short of it is, for whatever reason, he's their goal line back, and if they can get the ball inside the 5-yard line, it's Taysom time, and that's going to be interesting. And it's certainly interesting in DFS where he's not really expensive at all. But when I do my rankings, I did not rank him in DraftKings, Taysom, because just of the PPR aspect of DraftKings, but you have to rank him in FanDuel where touchdowns kind of give themselves a little bit more weight. I felt foolish not ranking him in FanDuel. So I felt like, I think the one I pivoted, I ranked Jake Ferguson on DraftKings because I think PPR wise, he could be really good with Cooper Rush. I just don't know about him scoring a touchdown, but then I took him out of my FanDuel ratings and put Taysom Hill in because he scores touchdowns. So
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I think definitely I like that line of thinking. Like Taysom Hill and FanDuel is a little bit more interesting to me. Juwan Johnson maybe on DraftKings, but again, to me, it's also a salary consideration based on the build.
Because Taysom Hill is way more affordable on DraftKings as well. I think I'm off the top of my head 6,100 on FanDuel and I think 4,400 on DraftKings. So that's a more than a 10% disparity, which I kind of look for when we're dealing with the pay up on DraftKings, the FanDuel with the 50 to 60K salary difference. All right, guys, that's the halfway point of the show. At this point, that is the end of the cash talk for now. Again, you can check Austin's article out every single Saturday. In that article, you will find links to play with us on both DraftKings and FanDuel. And you can find those in the description of this video as well. From now on, we're going to talk a little bit of tourney play. This is how I prefer to play. Austin alluded to the Milli Maker being the lottery ticket. That's my kind of favorite thing to do every week. I've never won, never come close to winning, but I like to throw $20 and make sure you guys have plenty of money to win from DraftKings. So we break this down by position. I'm going to give my favorite one play at each position. Austin is going to give you enough to build a full Austin lineup. If you've never tuned into our show before, I kind of do this from a redraft standpoint and from a tournament standpoint. So my picks can get a little wild or sometimes a little chalky. If you're building a lineup, you want to use Austin's advice a little bit more than you're using mine. Austin, quarterbacks. Let's talk about them.
Yeah, so I am intrigued by the San Francisco 49ers in general this week.
Have to be.
They are the highest implied team total on the main slate. If you were to look at all the teams, it's the Ravens that have the highest over the week. They're obviously playing as we record this. So I'm intrigued at just targeting the 49ers. And there's part of me that's like, feels like they might come out of the bye week like with something to prove. Like they haven't done well so far this year for their standards, and they are not the clear runaway for the NFC West. And they go up against a Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense that can be gashed through the air. So I feel really intrigued by kind of stacking 49ers this week. So I'm looking at Brock Purdy as my tournament captain. I think there's some other interesting considerations out there, but he's kind of my favorite one. I'm also honestly kind of interested in Sam Darnold because Minnesota looks a little bit intriguing against Jacksonville. I'm interested in Jalen Hurts against Dallas because Saquon is going to take up a lot of energy. So again, pivot to the pass catcher and the quarterback, see what happens. But the way I'm building the lineup that I'm going to talk through in this segment, I'm starting with Brock Purdy at the quarterback slot, and that's going to kind of shape how I build the rest of this lineup.
Yeah, I think my issue, Austin, doing this show, the one thing I've noticed this season is the high-priced quarterback, I'm willing to bet, has not won the Milli Maker at all this season. We were making jokes early in the year about how it was like Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Joe Flacco, who are winning these people $1 million. And then last week it was Geno Smith, because Jalen Hurts is my number one rated quarterback on both sites right now. But he's also the most expensive, or the second most expensive on one of the sites. I just don't feel comfortable building a lineup with that, especially with the two guys we're about to talk about, both being a full, $1,000, almost $2,000 cheaper than Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, I think that is very insightful. Like with a tournament like the Milli Maker, there's so many entries that somebody's gonna have whoever the top ranking
Quentin
quarterback
Johnston
that
is.
week. Yeah, whoever has they'll have the top ranking quarterback in the week, and that's not always the people we think it should be, right? Like especially this year, like it hasn't been that. Like there's random people that pop, and that kind of happens every week. Like people that we wouldn't be starting in redraft leagues will end up being the number one player on the slate. But I'm always thinking about this too from a kind of a smaller contest perspective. So
yeah,
paying up in those situations is beneficial, because like some of those contests, like you don't need 260 to win a 100 contest, which is 100 people on DraftKings. You need 180, 190, 200. And so then there's some security there by playing a guy like Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. Again, if you've never tuned in to DFS Academy, Austin, even when he plays tournaments, he plays safer and smarter in tournaments. I'm like, take my $20 DraftKings. I'm going to try to make $1 million. It's 100% how I do it. In Austin this week, to make my $1 million, I'm going to go for Patrick Mahomes. It didn't occur to my small brain, because you've told me this like 4 times on the show this season, the Monday thing where they don't price people, because I was shocked at how cheaply priced he was after coming off of a strong Monday Night Football, but that explains it, that the prices are already out there. One of the things I like about Mahomes, Austin, is something we've talked about a lot this season. He has those big red numbers next to his name, and I think that's going to scare people away from playing him, because the Denver defense has been pretty strong against quarterbacks this season, and against really every position this season. They've been pretty strong, but we also just saw them get torched by Lamar Jackson. And if Lamar Jackson can torch them, Patrick Mahomes can torch them. It's also a home game. Bo Nix has never played an Arrowhead before. I think there's a lot of things working against Denver in this matchup. And then I go and I look at what Patrick Mahomes has done against the Broncos in his last, 6 games here. 240 yards, no touchdowns in their last meeting. 306 yards and 1 touchdown in the meeting before that. But if you go back to 2020, or I guess it's 2022, 328 yards, 3 touchdowns, 352 yards, 3 touchdowns, 270 yards, 2 touchdowns. Patrick Mahomes eats against the Denver Broncos. So he doesn't need to get up for this game. It's a divisional matchup that tends to be when we see better Patrick Mahomes. And you kind of already got to the point that I wanted to get to. With DeAndre Hopkins, he seems to have a wide receiver one he can trust, which is something he hasn't had in a little while. Rashee Rice has had his issues on and off the field. And Juju Smith-Schuster couldn't do it. Xavier Worthy couldn't do it. It's just DeAndre Hopkins is giving him a level of comfortability where he can start doing some of the things that we haven't seen Patrick Mahomes do this season. And right now, I think people are scared off of him, and that's why I like him as a tournament play.
Yeah, well, and I think part of the thing too is like you got to look at strength of schedule to understand what is the context behind those red numbers, and that's why I like to look at like what's happened in recent weeks. But let's just talk about the schedule that the Broncos have had. They played Seattle week 1. Okay, Geno Smith is like a fine quarterback. Justin Fields week 2, like he didn't play like super well during that stretch.
Yeah.
Like he's exciting because he's an exciting player, but like not really threatening as a quarterback. They beat Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers. Like Baker Mayfield's been playing well, but he's not Patrick Mahomes. They played the Jets when Aaron Rodgers has been struggling. They played the Raiders, and so the recent schedule is where it gets really bad. They played the Raiders, who've been awful. The Chargers, who like they're playing defense and slowing it down. The Panthers with I believe Bryce Young at the start.
Yes, regardless, it was a bad quarterback.
Yeah, and that they played the Saints, and I think at that point, the Saints were rolling out Spencer Rattler. So like those numbers are biased by bad quarterback play.
Good point.
Lamar Jackson just popped off. To your point, I think it's a totally fine play. And honestly, like there's going to be a week. I truly believe at some point. I don't know when it's going to happen. It's going to happen this year. It might happen next year. There's going to be a week where it's Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce in the optimal lineup. I believe it. it's going to happen. And I like the chances this week because of the history here.
Yeah. Moving on to running backs, Austin, you got a couple of them for us.
Yeah. So I gotta be honest. There's a lot of running backs I like this week. I would I would not hate a 3 running back build in a tournament slate. I don't typically do that, but contemplated this week. So the first one I have is Breece Hall. It was 7,600 on DraftKings, $8,200 on FanDuel. It feels right. It's like kind of the simple way to
That's
put
fair.
it.
Yeah.
The Cardinals across the season have been not doing super well against running backs. And I remember last year we were picking them all the time on being a good matchup for running backs. They've been kind of middle of the field this year. They've given the 14th most points since week 6. But this is a close game. We haven't really seen like a true like Breece Hall pop off game. And I could see easily in this game, like Devontae Adams started catching fire in the last game. Garrett Wilson has been good. And so those 2 receivers are now starting to really open up this offense and like be threatening. And that could actually really open up the run game for Breece Hall. So I'm very intrigued by going towards him this week. I also think people aren't going to want to play him as much. So I think there's some low rostership involved. I'm probably more intrigued by my other running back, which is Aaron Jones, who's at $6,700 this week. It's a really good matchup for him. Jacksonville's allowed the 5th most points to the running back position since week 6. Minnesota, they're favored by 7 points, so they're expected to be very, very ahead. They have a 25.5 point implied team total. And I think that people are going to kind of overlook this matchup because Jacksonville is not interesting. And I like the idea of betting on Minnesota getting ahead and doing it with Aaron Jones at the helm. We haven't gotten a lot of touchdowns from Aaron Jones this year. So I'm also betting on like some of that regression to hit this week. And we know Aaron Jones can have like a 4 touchdown game. So I'm intrigued by betting on him this week.
Yeah, one of my favorite running backs. I believe, if I spoiler alert, Austin, I told you you only had 2 of my guys from my lineup. You have 3 of my guys from my lineup because I think Aaron Jones, or did I move off of him? I don't. Nope, I didn't. Okay, perfect. So Austin, my lineup is just full of your guys at this point. So I'm happy about that because it means I made good decisions. My back is DeAndre Swift, Austin. This is more about he's been doubted just a lot this season and he just keeps performing. And when he started to take off back in week 4, it was easy to look and say it's the schedule. The Rams were struggling against running backs. And then he had the Panthers who were struggling against running backs. Then he had Jacksonville, who's not very good. Then he got to Washington and they are good. And he had his highest yardage total of the season, 129 yards and a touchdown. A little bit down last week against Arizona, 51 yards, but 6 catches. That's his second or third game this season with more than 5 targets and second game with more than 5 catches. You love seeing that from a running back, especially in DraftKings scoring. I think this is a matchup for Chicago, against New England. New England has been beat up by running backs this season as well. They don't do a lot well on defense outside of Christian Gonzalez. And that's the thing is Christian Gonzalez is likely to take DJ Moore out of this game. And if he takes DJ Moore out of this game, they're going to need to lean on other weapons. And DeAndre Swift underneath has been a favorite route of Caleb Williams, who just seems unwilling to push the ball down the field right now.
Yeah, I actually really like this pick. I contemplated only picking one running back and going with DeAndre Swift myself because New England's been allowing the 6th most points to the running back position since week 6. The reason I didn't initially is because I do have a concern that I don't trust the offensive coordinator staff.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like they should have smashed last week against the Cardinals, and I don't understand why they didn't run the ball more and establish the run. So I do worry a little bit about them just not using their running back in a way that I think would benefit them and help make things easier on Caleb Williams. But for that same reason, I bet you DeAndre Swift will be like 5 to 10% rostered. And if he scores 20 points, like he's going to be helping you in tournaments, especially the smaller ones. So I will probably mix him into some of my lineups, even if I'm not as bullish on him as someone like Aaron Jones this week.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Austin, we're going to move on to the wide receivers. You got 4 of them for us.
Yeah. And I got to admit, like this week's slate was a little bit tricky for me because there's a lot of lopsided games predicted. There's a lot of large spreads. So it's hard to think through some of the game script on this, but one thing I'm betting on is I'm betting on the 49ers to just kind of run up the score and say, like, look, we need to assert our dominance in the NFC and show that we're back. And so I mentioned Brock Purdy earlier. I think I'm very intrigued by Ricky Pearsall coming out of the bye week. He was a first round draft pick. He started to get some more run in the past few games, and now they've had that one break. Like, remember, for rookies, like, this is one of the first breaks he's gotten since the draft. And so coming out of that bye week, this could be a huge opportunity for him to really step into that wide receiver 2 role.
I think he had a little bit of a break when he got shot in the chest 2 months ago. I cannot fathom. Shot in the chest is just a phrase that I don't think goes hand in hand with back on the field in fewer than 2 months. It's incredible to me. Ricky Pearsall deserves all of the grace. I hope it goes great for him this week.
Yeah, which for the record is not like actually that restful, I would argue.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're absolutely right. I wasn't trying to sound like an asshole and correct you, but I'm definitely the one who sounds more weird about saying he got shot in the chest. He had all the time in the world to rest. I'm pretty sure he worked a lot harder than probably anyone else on the team because he got shot in the chest. You're absolutely right, Austin. Moving on.
It's absolutely wild, though, that he's back on the field, and I do think this could be a great spot for him.
I do too.
Also, his salary is super cheap, which is going to help with how I'm building my lineup.
100% it helps. Trust me.
I'm going to bring him back with Sterling Shepard, who's $4,100 on DraftKings, $57 on FanDuel. He was just getting enough targets, and I think he could get in the end zone. He was getting a lot of out route targets. I think it was interesting. Like, it felt like it was a guy that Baker Mayfield was relying on. I also obviously need to shout out Cade Otton because he's kind of a smash play with the way he's being utilized right now. The running back room is full, and so it's a little bit hard to tell which one, but they were getting utilized a lot in the past game. So there's some other ways you can go, but some foreshadowing, you'll understand later why I didn't pick Cade Otton as my tight end because I'm going with a different tight end in this matchup. So instead, I'm going to bring it back on the Tampa Bay side with Sterling Shepard. Now, we talked about DeAndre Hopkins in the cash portion. Talking about him again, his salary is so cheap, and if he's getting that usage, like, I just am going to eat the chalk and get different elsewhere. Like, I think Ricky Pearsall will help me get different enough in most of my tournaments that I don't need to worry about the fact that DeAndre Hopkins might be chalky.
Yeah.
And lastly, I'm going with Khalil Shakir, who's $6K on DraftKings, only $62 on FanDuel. So definitely an interesting FanDuel play. He's starting to assert his dominance in this receiver room. He's getting a ton of targets. Like, we didn't really see the Dalton Kincaid breakout we were hoping for. Keon Coleman, he's a little bit banged up and it's kind of been in and out of the lineup. So I'm going with Khalil Shakir just because I think he's going to lead the team in targets. This is an interesting game context. It's a 47-point over under, so it does seem like it could actually push and be somewhat back and forth. But I'm really just kind of betting on, like, oh, you get like 7-8 targets and a touchdown, you're going to be doing just fine for me at 6K.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I like Kincaid, as we'll get to in one more section, but I think it's one where Buffalo, you mentioned asserting dominance. I think Buffalo is going to do the same thing in this game. They want to, and they're going to keep winning. For my wide receiver, I'm going to go with Davante Adams. This is just about comfortability. We saw good Aaron Rodgers last week, and now they're taking on an Arizona team, who they've been okay against the wide receiver, but they can also get beat. And this is a game where I'm not worried about, is it him or is it Garrett Wilson? I think they can both get it. We saw them both find the end zone last week. Garrett Wilson obviously had the flashier plays, but Davante Adams is slowly working himself and becoming a more important part of this offense. Roma Dunze went for 104 yards against them last week. Tyreek Hill, with bad quarterback play from Tua Tagovailoa, went 72 yards against them the week before. Josh Palmer, 63. And every one of these guys had another wide receiver go for at least 40 yards. So, and I could go back more weeks. Brandon Ayuk back in week 5 beat them for 147 yards. So while Arizona doesn't look like a great wide receiver matchup, they are a very beatable wide receiver matchup. And I think we're starting to see that comfortability. I like Aaron Rodgers this week, and that's something that I haven't said in fantasy football in 5 years. I think I like Aaron Rodgers this week against this Arizona team.
Yeah, I was looking at that as well as a potential way to build this. So I think it's a totally fine way to go about it. I don't think it's going to be played a ton because people aren't excited about Aaron Rodgers this year because he hasn't really played that well. But this could be a really good matchup for that pass game.
And I like Garrett Wilson as well. Honestly, this was a consideration, Austin, on who I was going to be able to fit in my lineup money wise. And for whatever reason, Devontae Adams is like $100 cheaper than Garrett Wilson, I guess, because he did make the most bananas one-handed shin-in catch that you've seen ever last week. So Adams was the cheaper play, and I'm going to go with the cheaper play when I'm trying to choose between two wide receivers. Moving on to tight ends, Austin, you alluded to it. You still like that San Francisco game, but you're not going to go with tight end one K. Dotton.
No, I'm going with tight end one George Kittle.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the reason K. Dotton was tight end one is because George Kittle had a bye week. I mean, some of this is a matchup consideration. Like since week 6, Tampa Bay has allowed an average of 24 points per game to the tight end position. Compare that to San Francisco, who's only allowed 14 points per game to the tight end position over that span. That's like, okay, cool, whatever. I just love George Kittle, and I think that we have learned that when Brandon Ayuk is out of the lineup, like George Kittle tends to be the biggest beneficiary of it.
100%.
And so I'm betting on that to continue. And he's been good this year. Like he's kind of continued the trend of last year where he was leading the league in leading tight ends and receiving yards last year. I don't know where he ranks this year, but he's continuing to get the volume to be able to compete in that realm. And it's just like, I don't know what else to say. He's good. The matchup's good. And like, there's nobody like Ayuk. And like this team, I could see them scoring 35 points this week. Like, just coming
100%.
out and rolling, and George Kittle gets 2 of those touchdowns, he's going to be crushing it in DFS lineups.
He is second in yards despite playing 2 fewer games than Brock Bowers and leads the NFL in tight end touchdowns this season. So
he's good.
And he's played 2. I just noticed he's played 2 fewer games than Tucker Kraft, who is second in touchdowns. So he in 2 fewer games than every other tight end, he's just outperforming all of those tight ends. George Kittle, good at football. Austin, you mentioned Dalton Kincaid a little bit earlier that he hasn't had the breakout, and that's exactly why I'm going with him in tournament. The targets have been there. His target share over the last, I mean, honestly, the season, but I'll go back to week 4 because he's had more than 6 targets in every single game. 7, 6, 7, 6, 7, 10. So it seems like at the very least he's going to have 7 this week if you believe in their going averages. But unfortunately, it hasn't amounted to much yards. He has only crossed 50 yards twice this entire season. He has 2 touchdowns. One of them was week 8. The other one was way back in week 3. This is a beatable matchup against the Colts, as you brought up. They don't cover the tight end all that well. And Kincaid is seeing the volume. I'm going to chase the volume, Austin, even if the production isn't necessarily there at his current price point, which is 4,900 on DraftKings, 6,000 on FanDuel. It seems like his floor is to double, at least in the full PPR. His floor is to double his salary. It's just a question of can he find the end zone and get towards tripling that salary.
Yeah, I think it's totally fair. Like I've been a notorious. I've thrown a lot of water on the Dalton Kincaid love for a long time.
Me as well, Austin. I was one of the lowest ranked on him coming into the season. I did not see the path. Clearly, for the season, we both look right, but it does seem like he's trending towards. There seems like there's going to be a big game on the horizon.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's interesting. Like there are specific matchups where his yards per reception have been really down, like when he's played good teams, essentially. So I sorted his game log on Pro Football Reference by yards per reception. His games with 10 or fewer yards per reception came against Baltimore, the Jets, the Dolphins twice, and the Seahawks. Those are all like the Seahawks, maybe not a great defense, but like those are all like they're not bad defenses.
No.
Right. The games that he's had where he's had over 10 yards per reception have come against the Cardinals, the Jaguars, the Texans, who have been underperforming on defense.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And the Titans, which is a little bit of an outlier in terms of like their decent defense, but it does seem to indicate like he can beat up on tough defense or on bad defenses. And if the volume is there and he gets in the end zone, I think it's a great pick. Honestly, I like the idea too of like let's get some touchdown regression. He's got 2 touchdowns on the season. Like with his usage, I'm sure it should be more than that based on just like averages over time.
Yeah. That's exactly my thought in this. Is it seems to be swinging his way. He's cheap this week. I'm going to give it a try. Austin, we can't finish the lineup without defenses. You took probably the best defense this week. I've been befuddled by this for 3 consecutive weeks. Another defense over 5K on FanDuel. So.
Yeah, I don't know that I'll play the Eagles on FanDuel because they are $5,100 there, but they're $3,500 on DraftKings going up against Cooper Rush. I like that. I like that a lot. Too. Like he just doesn't quite have the arm that he needs to like keep them in the games, right? Like it was fun watching him try and like come back on the Falcons, and I was like, oh, if Dak was in the game, that was probably a really great pass and catch, and we were probably going to lose this game. But with Cooper Rush, it was like, oh, it's just a little bit enough off that maybe it gets tipped up, it gets an interception. Also, Dallas's offensive line has been not good. So there's a lot here, I think, playing in Philadelphia's favor. I mentioned earlier Saquon's a really good play. I like the idea of like pairing the Philadelphia defense with Saquon Barkley in a lineup too. So I think it's a good matchup against a backup quarterback that we know what he is. Like he might do something fun for a quarter, but I don't expect him to really roll in this game in a way that makes Philadelphia like a bad defense to play.
Oh, 100%. And I love what you said there, that there's just something not there with Cooper Rush. The Eagles are a defense that will take advantage of that. Falcons, they've been kind of hit or miss on defense. The Eagles are more of an up-and-coming defense, and I think they can take advantage. And then the other part of that is CeeDee Lamb is also hurt. Yes. Very unlikely to be 100%. Possibility he doesn't play. Do you really want to go out and risk CeeDee Lamb in your first game without Dak Prescott? Maybe let Lamb at least get to 100%. I made the joke on yesterday's show, and by joke, I mean the prediction. I don't think Dallas scores a point on offense this week, a touchdown at least. I think Brandon Aubrey could kick a 70-yard field goal, but I don't think they score a touchdown on offense this week. I think the Eagles are a fantastic play. I just can't fathom paying 5,100, which is why. And this week, I'm going with 2 separate defenses for the websites because one of them you can only get on one of the websites. So on DraftKings, I'm going to go with the New York Jets. Again, I like this game against Arizona. For all the reasons Austin likes Breece Hall is why I like the New York Jets defense. Arizona, again, not a great matchup for defenses. Chicago actually scored 77 fantasy points against them last week off of 3 sacks and 2 takeaways. The Dolphins have kind of been a bad defense and weren't getting good play, so they did next to nothing against them. The Chargers had a takeaway. The Green Bay Packers had 3 takeaways. They haven't given up a ton of sacks, and that's what I'm going to need to see the Jets get after. And the Jets have been struggling as of late, but came on last week against Houston. 8 sacks in that game to go along with 11 hits on the quarterback and a takeaway. So I'm very happy with what I saw from the Jets last week, and I think that's going to lead into a good play this week. I think their defense, there's a lot of good defenses price-wise that I like on DraftKings. There are not on FanDuel. And so all the good defenses, FanDuel priced appropriately, but you do get the Detroit game for the 8:00 game. And I think that's a really nice matchup. They're only $4,000. And so I'm going to lean on Detroit. They have just played really, really good defense as of late. And even surprisingly, even losing Aiden Hutchinson, they've been able to get after the quarterback. They went out and got Zadarius Smith from the Cleveland Browns. I think that's an excellent addition to their pass rush. And you get Houston, who I just mentioned, gave up a ton of points to the Jets last week, 8 sacks, all that kind of fun stuff. Now you get Detroit, and I think you're looking at a very similar situation for only 4,000 over there on FanDuel.
Yeah, I think it's a couple of great picks. I've definitely the Jets is intriguing. Like the Cardinals haven't played well recently, and Detroit, they're just good. And like their special team game is good too, which is like also something that's interesting to have them as a defense.
Yeah. All right, folks. One last reminder, you can play with us. If you look for the links in the description of this video, we do a contest. I will mention the winners of that contest here in a second. But Austin and I, after talking to you guys about DFS for the whole show. Like to throw a couple of lineups together. This is our Thursday lineup. We don't change them because we're announcing them on the show. So sometimes they do really good. Sometimes they do really bad. Sometimes they do right in the middle like Austin did. And I do really bad. So Austin beats me by about 30 points last week, 143 to 118. Austin, that brings you up to 3-6. You mentioned you were going to do something a little bit different with your lineup building, and it seemed to have worked by getting me by 30. My Thursday lineups have not worked out real well, but you've heard all these names. In fact, you've heard all these names but one on the show today. So Patrick Mahomes is going to be my quarterback, DeAndre Swift and Aaron Jones at running back, DeAndre Hopkins, Devontae Adams, Ricky Pearsall, and I'm throwing Cortland Sutton in there. This is kind of the weird bring back in that Kansas City game because I do think this is a Kansas City blowout. Bo Nix clearly loves Cortland Sutton. He's going to throw him the football a lot. I'm going to play on those targets just like I'm going to with Dalton Kincaid and the New York Jets defense, Austin.
Yeah, I mean, I like that lineup, but my lineup's going to be better. So I'm doing a cash style lineup. So this is designed for cash. I'm going actually with Brock Purdy in my quarterback spot at 6,500. I've got a 3 running back build this week, and boy, when I tell you my running backs, you're going to be kicking yourself for not doing this. Got Bijan Robinson, Kareem Hunt, and Breece Hall. All 3 able to fit those into my lineup. Feel pretty good about that. The fun thing about this, by the way, I'm going to quickly pivot from my lineup for just a second and say, if Trevor Lawrence is out again, you can play Mac Jones and replace Kareem Hunt.
Crazy, yeah.
For Saquon Barkley. It works. My receivers, I've got Josh Downs, DeAndre Hopkins, and Parker Washington. At tight end, I'm going with Juwan Johnson. And then for my defense, I've got the Tennessee Titans going against the Los Angeles Chargers.
All right. So again, those are not the final lineups we're going to play this week. That's just us giving you a look at what we could build with some of the players we talked about on this show. And next week, we'll talk about who did well. Speaking of who did well, join the class. Look for those links in the description of this video. Last week, our friend Chris Molina takes down the DraftKings. This is his 10th win all time. He scored 157.8 points, which is a pretty good score for our contest. And over on FanDuel, Math is Golden, a name I remember, but it's their first win of the season, 139. So FanDuel was very winnable last week, just not winnable by any of us. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Austin, let them know where they can find your DFS content at Club Fantasy.
Yeah, so obviously you can catch me here every Friday for the DFS Academy for us to talk DFS Cash and tournaments. You can catch me and Josh Hudson on Thursdays for the Thursday Night Showdown Slate contest preview. That's Oh Captain, My Captain. And then get my weekly DFS Cash article every Saturday. That is, again, the most up-to-date, most current information that you will get from us before the Sunday games happen, unless you get those start-sit chats that we do on Sunday morning.
There you go. What Austin's alluding to is we don't just cover DFS. Club Fantasy actually does 12 shows a week. We are live every single day at some point. This show is obviously pre-recorded, but we probably have a live show dropping later on today. It's just what we do. Sunday is the only day we do not have a show that comes out for you guys. But we also love to help you guys with Start Sit. And the next time you're going to find us on air, this show drops on Fridays. On Saturday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern, we do Start Sit Different Day. It is a show with no show sheet, no agenda. All we do is spend 1 hour answering users' questions. They always have a ton of great guests there. Make sure you check that show out. That's 1 hour of us just answering your questions. And then every Sunday, if you're following us on Twitter at Club Fantasy FFL, we tag a bunch of our writers and let you guys just drop start sit questions the entire morning. And sometimes you'll get 5 answers, and sometimes they're 5 different answers, and you get to pick who your favorite writer is from Club Fantasy. But long and short of it is you get a ton of input from us here. We are here to help you guys win fantasy championships and hopefully win $1 million, just not before me. Thank you guys for tuning in to the DFS Academy. We will be back next Friday. Good luck this weekend. Talk to you soon.